Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we're here to squeeze some of the fat out of my personal library. So this is a book unhaul. I have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14 pieces here, which I will be getting rid of in my time in my apartment staying away from coronavirus. I have managed to find some pieces in my collection, in my library, that I will not be holding on to. So I will start right here. This is Again But Better by Christine Riccio. And one thing that I will say for this piece is I will praise this piece for what it is not. This piece is not social justice warrior porn. And it is to get a launch as an unpublished author in today's world with the fanfare that this book had. It is impressive. It really is impressive, and I do not mean this in a shady fashion. It is impressive that this is a book which was penned and is not social justice warrior porn. In fact, it is, if we're being quite frank, much the opposite of social justice warrior porn, in that it is basically a book about abduction and life rape. Basically, that's what it is. It's also not good. Look, hey, books are allowed to be bad. Writing is allowed to be bad. Authors are allowed to have flaws. All these things are true. All these things are true. One of my favorite writers, Chuck Palahniuk, is quite honestly terrible at ending books. Terrible, awful, miserable, bad at ending his works. But I kind of like the stuff that happens between the beginning and the end. I kind of like the writing that Palahniuk throws in there, although sometimes Palahniuk does read like a cheap ripoff of Palahniuk. That said, I don't think I enjoyed a single thing about this book, which is fine. I'm not the target audience. We picked it up. There's a series about this book on the channel, just because it was one of those topical things that you have to kind of do when you're doing this sort of thing. When you're doing a channel about books and something like this is launched, it's kind of important that you do it. It's kind of important that you cover it. Just if for no other reason than to, I don't know why I'm justifying myself here. I think part of why I'm justifying myself here is because the entire series on this book felt like me just badgering, and I don't like coming across that way unless it's about Harry Potter. But it was not Harry Potter. It was someone's first book, or at least first widely published book. I'm not sure, how much of a writer Christine Riccio has considered herself, and for how long. And I am not the target audience, and I am not someone who is necessarily susceptible to this type of literature, but it wasn't for me, so I'm not keeping it. Next, just briefly, How to Meditate by Lawrence LeSean. Get that here. Hard to say with the lighting. I'm fidgeting with lighting as I am recording these things on my phone for the time being for ease of upload, partially. But I will not be maintaining this book in my collection, because I think what I am going to do is I am going to journey down the Sam Harris rabbit hole of meditation, and we're going to see how that works. This is a book which was published in 1974. 1974, yes, 1974. And there is, to my experience with, I'll be honest, the casual browsing that I've done through this book, there is some hippy-dippy stuff involved, and it's not what I want to get into. Next, The Tycoon and the Wedding Planner, by a person named Candy Shepherd. This is something that I was going to review on the channel. I was going to do a read-along for. I can't do it. I can't do it. I am not against doing a romance book, a piece of page-turner porn, if you will. I'm not against doing that on the channel. If you have any suggestions, drop them in the comment section below. This one, A, I can't do it. B, I doubt very highly that anyone has immediate access to this book, so a read-along wouldn't necessarily be profitable for anyone. And I do not mean profitable in the... Is that mold? I got this from a library sale, so that might be mold. I hope that it's mold off of a liquid that... I'm just going to leave that. So, moving along. This is what I think is sort of an interesting loss here. The World's Greatest Short Stories, edited by James Daly, or Daly, I'm not sure. It is, I think, important. I think it is important for someone who has the reading style, reading type, reading catalog that I do, to periodically do something like this, to periodically get rid of a book like this. Every short story that I have in here is represented in one of my other collections, making this short story collection obsolete, if you will. That's a strange term to use, I think, for something like short stories, for something like literature, but it is, in fact, obsolete in my collection because all of the stories represented herein are represented otherwise in my library. And I think, look, it took me quite a while of time to actually figure that out, because you got to go through all of your collections of short stories to figure that out, or at least until you've exhausted the short stories that are in the collection that you're referencing. But it does keep you lighter in your library and without literary cost, if that makes sense. It is something that I am able to get rid of and not lose anything. And I don't think when I read this, I highlighted some things, but it wasn't, I didn't do a lot of note taking. And I don't think that the highlights that I noticed were anything that could not be, that I would not notice on a second read in a separate collection. What was that? That is 4/5. I'm going to take the time in advance to apologize to someone if this was a gift from you. I don't know how I got this book. I don't know why I have this book. I don't know where it came from. Napoleon wasn't short, and St. Patrick wasn't Irish when history gets it wrong. Andrea Barham. This is a type of book that I would have been really interested in when I was younger. Something that I could just go... First off, being a contrarian, I'm not a contrarian, but perhaps someone who is tilted towards that general direction. A book like this is something that you can always read and prove little things wrong that you had been taught or that you had learned otherwise. But it's not something that I necessarily want in my collection right now. So I'm going to get rid of it. Next, a book that I picked up for 10 cents. This was 10 cents when Hastings was going out of business. It is Return to the Little Kingdom: How Apple and Steve Jobs Changed the World by Michael Moritz. I picked it up because it was 10 cents. I would never have picked it up otherwise, so I don't think it belongs on my shelf. I'm never going to read it. It does not sound interesting. It was something that I just sort of compulsively put in a basket and purchased. The next, I think I'm going to do these two together. They were books that I purchased in 2008. I know because one of them had a pay stub in it that I was using as a bookmark. In 2008, I was going through what would be very easy to classify as a quarter-life crisis. I did not like a single thing about my life. I didn't like where I was. I didn't like what I was doing. I didn't like the person I had become. Anything. I didn't like anything. And later that year, I changed it by moving away to St. Joe, 60 miles north, for what that's worth, 60 miles north from where I am, and enrolling in a university. But during those times, it was literature. It was books. Not, I wouldn't say, I don't know how you're defining literature. It was books that got me back to things. It was books that helped me through. It was learning in that way, by that fashion, that I really sort of wriggled my way out of some of the things that I didn't like about my life and started to turn myself around. And honestly, look, I used to be a person of faith. I am no longer. God's promises for every day, a New Century Version, helped me. It did. There were little things in here. While I was a person of faith, whereas I was a person of faith, I was not anyone who had ever gone to church. So a lot of the stuff in the Bible was stuff that was still completely absent from my life. And there are bits of wisdom, I'm willing to admit this wholeheartedly, in the Bible, in religious texts. In fact, that is where people moved to compile things. So it is no mystery why there is and why there should be and why there would be little bits of wisdom in religious texts, because it was not an attempt simply to explain God. These were attempts in their time to encapsulate everything worth knowing, to be quite honest. And wisdom, in the Jordan Peterson sense, is something that would have very readily fit in to that definition of things worth holding on to, things worth keeping, and things worth moving with us wherever we were wandering. And along those lines, at that same time, cover doesn't do you any good. See if I can make people motion sick by causing the camera to focus and refocus, huh? Well, now it's not going to do it. That's fine. How Full Is Your Bucket by Tom Rath and Donald O. Clifton, PhD. This was a book basically about karma. Way too hippy-dippy for me at this time, but at that time it was something which I felt very strongly was helping me. Next, I am going to do these four sort of together, I think. Indiana Review from, I believe, 2016. Epiphany, a literary journal from 2011-2012. Tin House, Volume 18, Number 2, from, I believe, 2017. What are we doing here? 2017. Tin House, Volume 15, Number 4, from, I believe, 2015. Where are we going here? Well, maybe it doesn't. Here we go. Where are we at? I'm sure this is titillating to watch. Not able to. 2014. So these are small literary presses. These are the things that keep writing alive. Right? These are the things that no one buys short stories anymore. If we're being quite frank, no one pays for that type of literature. There was a point in time where a writer could be made, could become official, could be canonized through the short story and through the publications that bought them. No longer the case. Most places that you're going to get your short stories published, most places that you're going to get your poetry published, it's taking it off your hands. You are donating that work. And donating that work, quite frankly, for little benefit and to little cause. And it is unfortunate, but that is the way that literature is going. I think, and I have done videos on this on the channel before, I think that's about to change. I think that the self-publishing circuit is going to replace this. I think that what will happen is basically there will be a minor leagues of writing, and publishers will pick things up from that point. But I don't like a single piece that is in any of these four publications. And I say that with great pain, because these are the big times. These are the big times of today's world. Tin House is about as first rate a short story publication as you can get. And I didn't like a single thing in either of these volumes. And this is not just short stories. This is short stories. These are essays. There's poetry, editorials. And to my sensibilities, it's just all hogwash. And that's upsetting. And I think that there are... Look, I consider myself a writer, first and foremost. And I think that there are waves in which writerhood comes and goes. I think that you sort of vacillate between wanting acceptance and writing for yourself and wanting to be published and screw it if I never am and all of these things. And you go from, look, I've had things published, and I've had things published that have garnered a little. I was nominated for a push cart. I heard back from editors that really enjoyed pieces that I had written and wanted, not only wanted to publish the ones that the piece that I had submitted, but wanted me to submit more, wanted my name to become a more regular staple in their canon, if you will. And there's times where that feels great. And there's times where you have to look at yourself and the artist inside yourself and decide, it's time for me to retreat. I've got to reinvent some of the things about my writing. I've got to reinvent some of the things about my voice. I've got to reinvent some of the things about what I think it is to do art. And right now, I think I'm in one of those, look, I haven't made a submission since 2015 anyway. And I think right now I'm in one of those modes where I'm shutting down completely from the publication type world. Even though I on my personal channel, I had set goals to submit 100 things this year. 3 months down the drain, and I've submitted nothing. And I think part of that is a retreat into the self, a step towards reinvention. And I've got to take that as seriously as it comes, and I have to take that for what it's worth. And what part of what that means, I think, is getting rid of some of the subpar writing that has been considered top shelf, like those stories and poems and essays that are inside Tin House. I think that even in times of, no, I won't say that. I think that generally, keeping up with current writing is part of the writer's, is part of a serious writer's responsibility. That is a tough word for me to mince into a sentence like that. But I think that it is necessary. But I think during these times of reclusion, where we are recusing ourselves of community, I think that it's okay to not read contemporary goodness, if you will, because odds are, if you look through the ages, most of the stuff that's published is garbage anyhow. Always is, always will be, always has been. That is why the canon, if we're being honest with the canon, is so small compared to all of the voices that have cried out. So measure that how you will. Next, Fast Food Nation. A book that I had read for class. It was interesting. It wasn't bad. It was something that makes you look at the food industry in its entirety very differently. But it has run its course. I no longer need this book. I no longer necessarily want this book. I never have referenced this book since having read this book. So I don't think I need it taking up space on my shelf. Finally, what we are doing here is we are getting rid of one of our copies of 10th of December by George Saunders. This is a short story collection that I found, well, I found copies of this at the dollar store. I had read this the year it came out, I believe, in its entirety. And in fact, there are reviews of, I think, all but one of these short stories on the channel. What short story is it? I think My Chivalric Fiasco, maybe. I think that there's a review for all of the rest on this channel. But I found I found 10 copies of this at the dollar store and have gifted most of them out. 2013 it was written, so yeah, it would have been 2013 that I picked it up brand new, I guess, and read it. Or 2013 was published. It is a collection of short stories from George Saunders. It is really, really good if you do not have it. If you have not read it, it is definitely worth picking up. Anything, I think, by George Saunders, except for Lincoln in the Bardo, which I have yet to be able to read. I've picked it up and looked at it several times and not been able to make my way through it. Even bought a copy. It's up there on my top shelf. I'm not sure I'm ever going to get through that book. But that was it. Those were 14 things that I am clearing off of my shelves. A 14-book Unhaul here from my abode as I am trapped inside, going out only to my 2 jobs. So I hope to hear from you if you have read any of these in the comments below, or if there is a suggestion on a romance novel that you think I should do a read along for here on the channel.